Hello my friends, how are you? And welcome to the ups and downs for Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. I mean, what can we say about this film? Well, hopefully quite a bit, because that's why you've joined us for this video. But what a film. This is one of the most acclaimed Star Trek films of them all. It's also a highly acclaimed sci-fi film in general. I think those of us in our Star Trek community, we know that sometimes Trek can get sort of relegated into its own little spot in history. I have been told to my face, oh yeah, but that's good for Star Trek. And despite how I might feel about that, yeah, that's true. A lot of people do see Star Trek as its own little bubble. The Wrath of Khan was one of those films that I think burst that bubble. It arrived on the scene in 1982, in a year that was already incredible for the amount of films that were being released of such a high quality, and it really made its mark. This was following on from films like The Empire Strikes Back, which came out in 1980, which is again frequently cited as one of the best sci-fi films in the genre, let alone being a great Star Wars film as well. And although I love Star Trek the Motion Picture, that first film had left some a little cold. They had seen a film that was quintessentially Star Trek, but it wasn't very action heavy. Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan was the answer to that. Will you join me as I go through all of the ups and the downs for Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan? As ever, I will spend time in the temporal observations talking about both what this film references and the impact of this film as well. But the very first up that I want to give to this film has to go to James Horner. Jerry Goldsmith, as you know, had delivered an amazing score for Star Trek the Motion Picture. It remains one of my favorite movie soundtracks to this day. But he was not back for the second film. A then unknown composer, James Horner, was hired to come on and craft this new sound to go with new director, Nicholas Meyer. Oh, we will be coming back to him. His vision of the 23rd century. James Horner's score it's timeless, it's much more evocative of the nautical, the Navy theme that goes along with The Wrath of Khan, as opposed to the space themes of the motion picture. I think they're almost like chalk and cheese. They are two stunning scores for two very different versions of Star Trek. For reasons that will become obvious, there's quite an interesting juxtaposition of the two. The second up, as I mentioned there, the 23rd century, taken up to that because this is the first Star Trek piece of media, on screen I should say, that locks it into a time. In the 23rd century, well, it was fairly known before that the events of the original series and indeed the motion picture had taken place in the 2200s, but that's not actually confirmed until this film. So thank you very much, 23rd century, for confirming that. The next up that I must give to this film, and I know Chris's eye is twitching as I do this, is to the introduction of the Kobayashi Maru test. Now, if you're new to this channel, you will know that we have a bit of an ongoing love-hate with the frequency at which the Kobayashi Maru has been referenced in recent years. It's become a little bit of a hey, we're Star Trek too, but like anything, you use something too much, it loses its impact. Here, completely fresh, completely new, we see the Enterprise being commanded by someone other than Kirk or Spock, going into a battle that it looks like they have no chance at all of winning. We see the whole crew, sans Kirk, die. I will say on that's a down, and it's a logical down, that maybe one of them might be free for helping a cadet do their Kobayashi Maru test, sure, but it's a little bit of a logical stretch to have the entire main crew, including the chief medical officer, on the bridge for the Kobayashi Maru test. Always struck me as a little odd. Saying that, I mean the down stands, saying that, I know why they're there, and it's to play with the audience temporal observations. This scene contains the first of the reused footage that would occur a lot in The Wrath of Khan. Now bear with me, because I'm going to give it an up and I'm going to give it a down. The down is for, they've taken very iconic moments of the motion picture, scenes that quite frankly you know, and they've just sort of plopped them into this film. The 3 Klingon ships during the Kobayashi Maru test, of course. I mean, that opening scene is so iconic in the motion picture. To just repeat it here, and I know why, but to just repeat it here is a bit of a stretch to ask your audience to be like, hey, this is new. Where the up comes from is that the fallout of the motion picture, really quick, the fallout of the motion picture being such that they needed to make The Wrath of Khan cheaper. This was one of the ways they did that, and particularly with some of the musical switches that would come later on, I think they got away and highlighted and maybe heightened some, not all, some of the reused footage from the motion picture. So I want to give it its credit. The Kobayashi Maru being what it is, Saavik fails the test as, or passes, whatever way you want to look at it. That front of the simulator opens, Spock rises from the dead, and Admiral Kirk walks onto the bridge holding a copy of A Tale of Two Cities, advising Saavik to pray as the Klingons don't take prisoners. This entire scene sets up where we are now with this crew. Admiral Kirk is back at the Academy. The Enterprise is, it's effectively a training ship at this point. Because, the Enterprise has been going for a while. Some time has obviously passed between the motion picture and now as well. And that's really brought home with one of the lines in this scene, which is when Kirk says, gallivanting around the cosmos is a game for the young. Up. This, combined with the scene in Admiral Kirk's quarters, shows a very smart decision that they've made for The Wrath of Khan. Just really quickly as well, love the scene between Spock and Kirk in the hallway where they are celebrating his birthday, Spock being quite naturally Spock. Deeper meaning Spock? None that I'm aware of, Admiral. Except, of course, happy birthday. Love it. Take it up for that. This scene in Admiral Kirk's quarters is sort of a crucial moment in this film. McCoy arrives with the Romulan ale that would, of course, become so prevalent in many's of my nights out, but that's a different story altogether, and brings Kirk a pair of glasses. McCoy, trying to celebrate Kirk's birthday, becomes frustrated because, as in his words, damn it, Jim, everyone has birthdays, why we're treating yours like a funeral. The theme of age in The Wrath of Khan was an excellent inclusion, because the motion picture, I feel, struggled a little bit with trying to make everyone a little bit younger than they were. Listen, I get Hollywood. I know why they were trying to do that. The Wrath of Khan takes this theme and owns it. And of course, this whole theme of youth, age, life, death is crucial to why The Wrath of Khan works as well as it does. If Kirk wasn't feeling his age, if he wasn't feeling the wear and tear of all of these years in the service, would we really believe him to be as experienced as he was as we go forward in the film? In fact, you could argue that the motion picture, I don't know how deliberate this was, but in trying to portray him as younger than he actually was, and then depicting that he didn't know things as well as he did, was that perhaps a little nod, or maybe the beginnings, the seeds of what Meyer would pick up on from Robert Wise's version of Kirk? Who is to say? This scene, however, is a blinder. The pair of them play it fantastically. It is most definitely an up. We get our first new Starfleet ship in a very long time, because we are going to count the animated series, of course, why wouldn't you? But in live action, this was the first new Starfleet vessel introduced. So, taken up to the Miranda-class USS Reliant, NCC 1864. Who's serving aboard this ship? Why, it's only Chekhov. Lovely to see him. Great that he gets lines. There's a whopper of a down with the logic here. And no, I'm not talking about the thing you might be already thinking of. I'm thinking first of all about They fly into a system. They are expecting to find Ceti Alpha 6. Assumedly, that means there are 5 other planets in this system. Would they not have detected, 4 other planets and a fairly large amount of space debris, about a planet's worth? Look, they had to get them onto Ceti Alpha 5 somehow. I feel they could have done a slightly better job of doing that. I feel as well, of course, the idea of depicting Ceti Alpha 5 as this barren wasteland, look, it works for cinema. And of course you have to go, well, how did all of Khan's people suffer the way that they did? Well, the existence of the Ceti eel. They did it in the original series, The Apple, have this idea of the Garden of Eden, but full of things that can kill you. Part of me was saying, well, okay, don't repeat ideas. But the other part of me is like, this is literally a sequel to an original series episode. So, for me, personally, I think the logic is a bit stretched to get people where they need to be. If it's your favorite part about the movie, have an up for it, sure. Do you know who's definitely getting an up? All right, Kyle, how are you getting on? I like him. So yeah, he's getting it up. On their mission, they have to find out if there's any life forms whatsoever on board these planets. Now, this version of the 23rd century, let's just say sensors are a bit more rudimentary than they would become. They know that there is life on the planet, but they can't identify what it is. So they have to contact the head of Project Genesis, a certain Carol Marcus, Dr. Carol Marcus, who, by the way, BB Besh, up, to ask if they can transplant it. The entire setup of Project Genesis is, I think, one of the stronger elements of The Wrath of Khan, because there's an awful lot of discussion as to the devastating potential of the Genesis torpedo. You have to address that, and they do very, very well. And the hesitation, the worry, and the respect that Marcus, David Marcus, and of course those working for Project Genesis attached to this device, that no, they will not be flippant about it. And the fact that long before we know anything about Khan, they are making sure Starfleet is aware of that. And I think this was just such a strength of this film. Although Starfleet is depicted a lot more militaristically in this version of Star Trek, they're grown-ups. They're not treated as, meatheads. They're not treated as, they're just soldiers. There's none of that. There's none of that here. And I think it is such a strength of this film. But anyway, Dr. Carol Marcus is an up. I have given my down already to reused footage. That's done. So I am giving an up to the reused spacesuits from the motion picture, because completely extraneous scene having Kirk do a spacewalk. However, having 2 suits meant Captain Terrell and Chekhov could beam down to the planet. That's an up from me. The entire scene as they enter the cargo containers of a ship that has no name. First of all, look, I get it. People go on away missions all the time. They're curious, but you might let your ship know. Maybe. They go inside and, they start having a root around. They see an awful lot of concerning things, like a book collection's pretty concerning when it's just that amount of books. And then you get Chekhov going, Botany Bay. Botany Bay. Damn. I love it. Look, Botany Bay gets an up from me. Should Chekhov know about it? No, he shouldn't. It is a well-worn point at this point. Chekhov wasn't on the Enterprise during Space Seed, or was he? I'll come back to that in Temporal Observations. Given a flippin' down. We've lost contact with our captain. We can't get through. I'll give me a bit more time. Send someone! This is why captains shouldn't go on away missions. Another reason why captains shouldn't go on away missions is up. Ricardo Montalban, have a latinum up, sir. That chest, which is real, by the way, everything about it, the hair, the depiction, the one glove, very Michael Jackson. We've got that, the kind of, the cracked version of this that turns up a little bit later on in the film, but still, everything about the look just works. And he's playing a king. I think that's maybe the best description. It's not just that he is the Superman and he is full of rage and everything. He is a king without a kingdom. He has loyal subjects, but there's nothing that he can do. And he does say that thanks to his intellect, he kept his people alive. And if that wasteland is as barren as it looks, one has to wonder how they did that. The crew of the Botany Bay has been whittled down to the survivors that you see. Doesn't go into like over specifics. One has to wonder what happened between the crew as well. He does reference his beloved wife. Temporal observations there as well. The entire introduction scene is perfect. We have, of course, I don't know you, but I never forget a face. Grand. I love it. Everyone, look, by the time this was being filmed, people knew. Well, maybe not by the time it was being filmed, but people knew. And they just went, oh, we'll just go with it. It was too complicated to change it. I love the bit where Khan just lifts Chekhov up by the handle. Like, that handle was there in the motion picture, so I think it was used so well here. I am giving an up to the Ceti eel. Those little larvae dropping on their faces and crawling toward their ears. Who hurt you, Nicholas Meyer? Once the screaming stops, Khan asks quite calmly for all of the knowledge on Project Genesis and also where he may find Admiral Kirk. Admiral Kirk is currently... I have to give an up to this scene. So Kirk is en route to the Enterprise, a combination of reused footage and new footage, of course, and Sulu is piloting the travel pod. Of course, we all remember how much I waxed lyrical about the approach to the Enterprise in the motion picture. Can I just give an up to the sheer acting going on here? That you have Sulu and Kirk, who seem generally happy to see each other, when George Takei and William Shatner were probably imagining just the worst possible things that could happen to each other. Whatever. Admiral Kirk is coming aboard the Enterprise for an inspection for its new training crew. It's a fun scene. We get that whistle, Kirk comes on board, we get that little reference to Scotty's wee bout, and it's just fun. It's just fun. We see the return of Saavik again. Saavik ends up effectively commanding the ship out of dry dock. So this dry dock scene, the approach, there is, for me, as you know, no better scene than, panning over the Enterprise in dry dock in the motion picture. Leaving dry dock, I've got to give it to the Wrath of Khan for this one. Thanks primarily to James Horner's music. Yeah, they smashed it. Well done. And Saavik pilots them out. So let's spend a minute on Saavik. I'm going to give it up here to Saavik and to Kirstie Alley, who brought the role to life. Fun fact, as I was growing up, I saw the films, because I was only wee, I saw them out of order. So I saw The Search for Spock before I had seen The Wrath of Khan. So for me it was, I didn't say it, like I was too young to realise, but I kind of went, Robin Curtis looks different. Because I had been introduced to that version of Saavik. Kirstie Alley walks such a fine line in this role. There is so much emotion, but it's also so restrained. She is so Vulcan, even though I think at this stage now it's fairly well known that the original idea had been she'd be half Romulan. This was dropped altogether. There were no scenes even filmed suggesting she was Romulan, other than the emotion that she shows. I think it adds a lot to the character. And I think she plays that because she is Vulcan. I mean, that scene where she speaks with Spock in the Vulcan language, he's so human. Well, nobody's perfect. It's just these little jokes just really land for me. They really work. I think it is a shame. I love Robin Curtis and I love her Saavik as well. I do think it's a shame that this is the only Kirstie Alley Saavik we ever got. There is another Temporal Observations to make about that. Listen, stick around for Temporal Observations. I've got stuff to go through. Meanwhile, Khan has taken control of the Reliant. He has Chekhov contact Regula I and let Dr. Marcus know that they're coming to take Project Genesis. Carol bloody rightly gets on the phone to Kirk. Up. I like people who are smart. And although it's being jammed at the source, which is of course, the first indication of something's not right here, the Enterprise is about to set sail, a little bit to get through first, but about to set sail for Regula I. But just hearing that Admiral Kirk gave the order to take Genesis, she checks. That's something that's missing from so many films. It's like, check your sources, folks. Anyway, yeah, up. There's also a great exchange where the two doctors, Marcus, Carol and David, discuss their differing opinions of Starfleet, whether it's a military or not. And it's set against the backdrop that the Reliant is on the way to come and get Genesis. But Carol Marcus stubbornly maintains that Kirk is not the soldier that David Marcus thinks that he is. You know, they do have earlier they had a sweet exchange about, you know, Kirk being an old Boy Scout, which, as she said, he never was. But, you know, this idea that Starfleet is just the military wing of the Federation is inaccurate. And I like it because it's an early depiction of life outside of Starfleet and how it might look at Starfleet looking in. Kirk goes to Spock's quarters. Spock is there meditating, and we get the first utterance of one of the most immortal lines in Star Trek. You know, I have been and ever shall be your friend. Slightly paraphrased, but up, obviously. Because Kirk is there to let him know that he has to divert to the Mutara sector. And Spock, as Spock would, says, you know, I know you're trying to protect my ego here, but I don't have one. You're the flag officer, you're in command. And it's just so simple, and there's no... Obviously, so much of the motion picture was about Decker and Kirk bumping heads with each other. We don't get any of that here. Again, it suits the film perfectly, a strength of the film and the script. Kirk's speech to the cadets on board as well, asking them to grow up a little early. Again, I like, he is respecting that they are able to handle this, or at least what he thinks is coming. And he is also saying, I understand as well that you were not expecting this to be your first mission. It's just little things like that. Cutting back to Khan aboard the Reliant, well, we get one of the scenes, don't we? You get Joaquin, played by Judson Scott, although he wouldn't have known that at the time, congratulating Khan on his victory, but also asking him, is it necessary to go after Kirk? I mean, after all, he's got the ship, he's got Genesis. He's got everything he needs to make a new life. Does he really need to kill Kirk? And Khan, of course, goes, he tasks me. He tasks me and I shall have him. I will chase him around the moons of Nibia and around the Antares maelstrom and round perdition's flames before I give him up. Pale imitation, clearly, but Ricardo Montalban guessing up for that scene. Because, I mean, what a scene. At this point, Kirk feels the need to clue Spock and McCoy in to why they're going to Regula I. And I have to be honest, we get it down here, and it's for that slightly odd shot where Kirk has to do a retinal scan to prove that he is himself to access the files on Genesis. And it's really cuts to him looking very kind of like, yeah, I've never warmed to that scene. But then we get what is one of the most impressive scenes in cinema in 1982. And if you're watching this for the first time in 2025, you're going, Sean, you're having me on here. But no, the demonstration of the Genesis torpedo and the Genesis wave in this scene was the first CGI sequence in movies. Special effects is sort of a wider term, but you know, the particle patterns that were used here, this was the first. Take it up. Well done, Star Trek, with your innovations there. Explaining what Genesis is to these people leads to McCoy, and I think quite fairly, vocalizing the potential dangers of this torpedo. And again, it's a little bit of an echo of what we got earlier with the Genesis crew themselves. You know, they knew the destructive power that this could potentially have. And as McCoy says, you know, he's horrified with the idea that, you know, something will be reconstituted for its new matrix. You know, well, you know, God made the world in, 7 days. Here comes Genesis, we'll do it in 7 minutes, or 6 days or 7 minutes, And Spock goes, calm yourself, Doctor. But I think McCoy raises incredible points here. That is an up from me. This needs to be vocalized. We need to know the stakes. The stakes are only confirmed when we get our first dogfight of the film. Now, the Reliant versus the Enterprise, this entire sequence, of course, this is an up from me. All new footage using the beautiful ship models constructed for the Wrath of Khan. On screen, it was the first Starfleet versus Starfleet vessel. I know back in the Ultimate Computer, the M5 computer takes over the Enterprise, which leads to the attack on the other Constitution class ships. But with the greatest of the love to the 1960s. This looks a little bit better. Seeing the Reliant fire on the Enterprise the way that it does, and with those pulse phasers that they use, I mean, this thing looks sore. The Enterprise looks like it's got the absolute crap kicked out of it. I remember reading about the motion picture where there was a initial, very earliest days, there was talk of, oh, can we redesign the Enterprise because it's so badly designed for flying through space. First of all, I'm so glad they didn't, but second of all, so much of it is exposed, and that is highlighted here in this film. They hit the main energizers, they frankly knock the crap out of the Enterprise. We see chaos throughout engineering other parts of the ship. I mean, it's bad. It's bad. And also, this is the Enterprise. It hurts in our hearts seeing it attacked the way that it is. And at this stage, no one knows why. You know, Kirk is naturally kicking himself for not taking the advice of raising the shields. Fair play Saavik for, of course, quoting regulations. The reveal of Khan. Up, and to address a long-running question about this film is, you know, is it as strong? Because our main hero and our main villain never meet. Kirk and Khan are never in the same room in this film. I believe it's a strength. If it ever came down to fisticuffs, which it often does in Star Trek, I know Kirk won the fight in Space Seed. I feel this Khan would cripple him, and I feel it will be short. And that is not a knock on Admiral Kirk in this film, nor is it a knock on William Shatner. But this Khan was power and strength and poise, and he was never going to lose a physical fight with Kirk. And I'm glad they didn't even hint at going in that direction. This was about expertise and intellect. That's what this film is about. So having them face off this way is such a smart decision, such a strength of the Wrath of Khan. Seeing them bounce back and forth, Khan is there for a couple of very simple reasons. One is to kill Kirk, but also he wants more information on Genesis, and we get that back and forth. Genesis, what's that? Don't insult my intelligence, Kirk. We're not gonna have, it's no grandstanding, it's nothing like that. It's, this guy means business, and do I believe he would destroy the Enterprise? Yes, I do. This gives us our chance to see the difference of expertise. Kirk is able to pull up the prefix code for the Reliant. Now, while this was something that was just introduced for this film, I do think it's a strength. And the fact that, spoiler I guess, we don't see it again, a strength because it was used to such effect. It is an up for me. They needed something to help them win that fight. And it was our first real example of Khan, as powerful as he is, when it comes to commanding a starship, is woefully on the back foot. Joaquin is able to let Khan take a breather, if you like, because Khan wants to destroy them right away. But as Joaquin highlights, the Enterprise is not going anywhere. And then we get that beautiful scene of the Reliant flying up and over the Enterprise, which is absolutely an up from me. And then in all of the confusion and all of the damage, we get it down. Scotty, why on earth did you bring Peter Preston to the bridge and not straight to sickbay? It's never addressed in the film, but Peter Preston, who is Scotty's nephew, it's a very sad scene. There was no need to bring him to the bridge. We then get that very affecting scene afterwards where, just as he's dying, Peter says, you know, highlighting a scene from earlier on, is the word given, Admiral? The word is given. And he dies, and it's very sad, and it works. He might have lived if you brought him to the sickbay, but sure, listen. The Enterprise limps to the Mutara section where it finally arrives at Regula I. Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and Saavik beam over, and we get the horrific discovery of most of the Regula staff with their throats slit, hung upside down, up for the abject horror of that scene. It's truly rough. And McCoy, like DeForest Kelley, sells it with his reaction. Ugh. Ugh. They then discover Terrell and Chekhov stuffed in a cupboard, and Terrell tells just enough of the truth to let them believe the lie. The lie, of course, being that, you know, they're sort of back to normal and back working with them again. You know, it works because we as the audience are going, yes, that happened, yes, that happened, yes, that happened. Okay, all right, he's telling Kirk what happened. I believe him. They see that the transporter has been left on and that the coordinates are deep within the planetoid beside it. So, naturally, what are they going to do? Beam inside? We get that exchange where McCoy says, well, suppose they beam to nowhere. And Kirk says, well, it will be your chance to get away from it all. I could argue that, really, we're doing jokes at this time, but I think it's delivered fine enough. They beam down, discover Doctors Marcus, Carol, and David, and the greatest scientist who ever lived, Jeddah. Jeddah does not get talked about enough. It's just not fair. He was part of the Project Genesis team, presumably a genius for being able to work on it, and only for the fact that bloody Marcus knocks somebody out of the way. He gets vaporized by Tyrell, and that's why our dilithium up goes to, all right, no, I can't give it to Jeddah, sorry, but, oh man. Well, you had to have a red shirt, didn't you? But yes, this reveals that, no, Tyrell and Chekhov are not quite as on the level as they appeared to be. Tyrell pulling out the phaser that had originated in the motion picture, which I always forget. Keep thinking it was introduced in this one, but no, it was there in the motion picture. Tyrell gives the coordinates for the Genesis torpedo to Khan, who has of course been listening to everything, but he can't bring himself to kill Kirk. In an act of horrific bravery, he turns the phaser on himself, knowing he can't quite overpower the larva of the Ceti eel in his brain, but he can't bring himself to kill Kirk either. Oh, this film has some dark moments in it. And the scene where the Ceti eel burrows its way out of Chekhov's ear. There is something to be said for had Tyrell waited 5 minutes, but still. They then, we get the infamous scene, which is Kirk speaking to Khan, where he says, you'll have to come down. You don't have me, Khan. You have to come get me. I've done far worse than kill you, Admiral. I've hurt you, and I wish to go on hurting you. I shall leave you as you left me, buried alive. Cut! Is what Kirk calmly says following that. In a scene that is so infamous, it should never be ever remade or done by another actor again. Don't you agree? Well, with all that excitement, Kirk gets a chance to chat to Carol, and they have a bit of a discussion to have, don't they? Explain, David. Yeah, David Marcus is, of course, Kirk's son. I love Carol Marcus in this film. I love BB Besh. And I have to say, I love Merritt Buttrick in the role as well. He gets less to do, and he's kind of hampered by he has to be a bit gruff with his dad. Wouldn't you be? Because from his point of view, his dad just wasn't around. But there's more context to it than that. It's grown up, is what it is. And it comes across really well. No one is the bad guy. And it's a definite up from me. Because you can find revelations of, the secret child you never knew you had. And sometimes it can be good, and sometimes it can be not good. I feel that Picard's third season was very much an homage to this. I actually think, again, largely because of the performances. I think Patrick Stewart and Gates McFadden played that scene like a blinder. So I think as homages go, it's pretty good. But I love Carol and Jim in this scene. They talk about how they're feeling, and we get, Kirk saying he feels old. And Carol says, well, why don't I show you something that will make you feel young as when the Earth was new again? Down to the Genesis cave. It doesn't look great. It's been cleaned up, I think, as well as it's going to be. I just think that the initial construction of it wasn't fantastic. It looks a little bit too fake. But it is here in this cave that we find out why he is the way he is. There was discussion behind the scenes of, is it a good idea or not to have Kirk cheat on his Kobayashi Maru test? Is this what we want in our leading man, to find out that he's a cheat? But director Nicholas Meyer argued that it's the flaws that make the man. Knowing that he cheated, that he never faced the no-win scenario. He changed the parameters of the test so that he was able to win. It's cheating. Just because he got complimented on his original thinking doesn't mean he ever really took the test. And that is, again, a critical thing in this film, which is why the revelation isn't up from me. This, of course, leads to the revelation that, again, experience if there's open communication, I'm not going to give you my PIN code, am I? So they knew Khan was listening, so Spock exaggerated the amount of time it would take to repair the Enterprise. The whole beam up sequence and the revelation that, not much is working, but we've got some stuff back is brilliant. It's a good bait and switch, because also you don't expect it from Spock. As, Saavik asked him, so, you told a lie, I exaggerated. And this leads then to the Enterprise heading toward the Mutara Nebula and our big final act of the film. There's actually one part of the ship I really want to give a special shout out to, and that's the torpedo bay that was adapted from the Klingon bridge of the motion picture and rebuilt into the bay as we see it for this film. Now, for a very heartbreaking reason later on, but just you get the sense of real activity, all right, part of you is like, it's going to take you a while to load a torpedo. It's not great in the middle of a battle, but at the same time, it looks like, yeah, that's functional. And that is an up from me. The chase to the nebula itself, Kirk has to really bait Khan into following. Because once you go into the nebula, you lose your sensors, you can't see where the other ship is going. Also, it's, your shields are going to be down. It levels the playing field. So getting the Reliant in there means, at least technologically, they're going to be on the same page. And this is really where experience comes into play. The nebula itself, I think, is a beautiful creation. Especially, it's a cloud tank. It's a relatively simple, for the people who know what they're doing, I'm not saying I could do it, but it's a relatively simple effect. It's gorgeous and gets reused in Star Trek a lot to show you how good it is. It's not exactly a slam dunk for the Enterprise. They get hit, and they get hit hard. That flame effect in the torpedo bay, why do you think I brought it up a second ago? Because taken up to that torpedo and that exploding effect, fair play to that stuntman. Kirk's response deals a lot of damage to the Reliant and leads to the death of Joaquin. He's been there throughout, and there's a real sense of, he will follow him to the end, which of course he does follow him to the end. There's it's sort of a funny behind the scenes story, because you won't see Judson Scott's name anywhere in The Wrath of Khan. Long story medium, there was a bit of a back and forth between his agents and, the film's producers. They wanted him to have billing alongside the returning cast of the original series, which they said, look, you're not going to get that. We'll offer you lower billing. To which they said, oh no, we don't want that. They effectively said, we'll waive billing, which Judson Scott inferred to mean, oh, I'll just be in the end credits then. Well, no, he's not in the end credits either. So, whoops. It was a bit of a kerfuffle. He did get over it because he comes back. He's in more Star Trek as the years go by. But yeah, so Judson Scott is the actor's name, just in case you were wondering. Anyway, he dies well, and Khan swears to avenge him. Chekhov, who's feeling a bit better, comes up to the bridge and he fires the torpedoes that effectively cripple the Reliant. It blows off a nacelle. It destroys the torpedo bay because Kirk had the wherewithal to go, space is 3D. So he drops the ship. We get those gorgeous shots. It's a submarine battle. It really is. When it rises up behind the Reliant, it's such a powerful scene. It leads to, effectively, everyone but Khan is now dead on the Reliant, and the scene of him activating the Genesis. The music really dials it back during this. In fact, I think while he's activating the torpedo, it's gone altogether, and it's just Khan turning it on. And this is him, turning on the nuke that will destroy the forest. You can run, but are you going to get away from it? The Enterprise senses what's happening. Is it too late? Up. Khan watches the Enterprise try and get away. Sulu is the one to vocalize, we're not going to make it, are we? And then you have just that little head shake from David Marcus, who's on the bridge. It's just played perfectly. The tension is so high. Up. Spock's nipped off the bridge. We'll come back to that. We get Khan's last words, and they are a quote from Moby Dick. From hell's heart, I stab at thee. For hate's sake, I spit my last breath at thee. Ricardo Montalban. Up. The Enterprise is in trouble, but thankfully, they have Spock. Spock goes down to engineering because he knows he can get the engines back online but it's going to take going into that irradiated chamber. We get that quick scene of the Vulcan nerve pinch and very quick mind meld, which was added later on. In he goes, and being blasted by radiation, he gets the main energizer back online. They're able to go to warp, which means we get that gorgeous warp effect of the Enterprise flying out of there. The Genesis torpedo explodes, it consumes the Reliant and the matter in the Mutara Nebula, beginning the formation of the Genesis planet. But this is all in, if you like, the orbit of the death of Spock. The death of Spock is enough, not because he died, but it has taken on a life of its own at this stage. It was shocking at the time for a couple of reasons, and the performances, everything about it. I couldn't not make this our dilithium up of the film. It is done pitch perfect. Leonard Nimoy standing blinded, tugging his shirt so that it's all straight and without a crease. Kirk, William Shatner, the pair of them sliding down, the glass separating them. Everything about it is perfect. The funeral scene that follows, taken up, is perfect. Everything from Scotty on the bagpipes to Savik's single tear. Just... It takes death sometimes for people to appreciate life. So when Dr. Carol Marcus asks Kirk on the bridge, watching the new planet form, how he feels, he confesses he feels young. Spock sacrificed himself to save the Enterprise, but so many have survived, so many are alive, that there is hope in this ending. Now, of course, we would know that it would not be the ending. We get Leonard Nimoy delivering Space, the Final Frontier, and then we get, which of course is an up, and that shot of the torpedo tube coming to a rest on the Genesis planet, which is an up. And now I think it's time to go to temporal observations. The reused footage in this film, of course, I've talked about it already. It's done quite well. It would also be done again, funnily enough, after this. Let's talk about the big Spock's death in the room. So Spock dies in the Kobayashi Maru sequence because the death of Spock had been leaked long before the film hit the theaters, allegedly by a disgruntled Gene Roddenberry. Gene Roddenberry had very little to do with this film. He effectively, right or wrong, got blamed for the perceived financial failure of the motion picture. It did, the budget effectively ballooned on the motion picture, and because his name was on, the producers list, that sort of fell at his feet. Nicholas Meyer was brought in to direct this film. Now, I have to give an up to Nicholas Meyer for the job that he did on Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, because for all the reasons we've just gone through, really. But one of the things, allegedly, that Roddenberry hated was the idea of killing Spock. And there's so many theories behind the things. Leonard Nimoy wanted out, and then he changed his mind, and that's what the mind meld at the end, remember, that's what that was included, so that Nimoy could come back. I'll discuss that a bit more when we're going through the search for Spock. This idea that Spock was going to die was already leaked out there, so they killed him in the beginning. And then, haha, you got a death scene, there it is, to sort of pack a punch for the ending as well. Nicholas Meyer was the one who created the character of Savick. Savick is... There's just so much about Savick in Star Trek's history. So obviously the character returns in The Search for Spock and The Voyage Home, and most recently in Otoy's Unification, which I'll come back to that in a moment. The idea of Savick being half Romulan was dropped almost immediately. So as I say, it's not discussed in this film, and Robin Curtis's portrayal, it's specifically much more Vulcan, much more logical, much less emotional than Kirstie Alley's. When it came to the undiscovered country, originally it was going to be Savick who was going to turn out to be the traitor, and now there was uproar over that one. Again, you had Nicholas Meyer, who was returning to direct The Undiscovered Country, butting heads rather severely with Gene Roddenberry on that one, and making the fair point that Saavik was his creation. He could do whatever he wanted. This version of Saavik appears only once. There was almost an appearance by Saavik in The Next Generation. In Cause and Effect, when the Bozeman comes through that rift, obviously you have Kelsey Grammer's Morgan Bateson captaining that ship. Well, there was a gag that they were going to have a Cheers revival, and Saavik, played by Kirstie Alley, was going to be standing on the bridge behind him. They couldn't make it work, so that's why the character who's standing by him doesn't speak, but looks fairly Saavik-esque. The half-Romulan idea, the rumour would be that it was going to be used for T'Pol's storyline in the never-produced 5th season of Star Trek Enterprise. Carol and David. Now, this would be the only appearance of B.B. Besh's Carol Marcus, but David Marcus would appear in The Search for Spock, played again by Merritt Buttrick, and, well, via a photo in The Undiscovered Country, because sadly Merritt Buttrick had passed away at that point. Carol Marcus, the character, would appear in Star Trek Into Darkness, played by Alice Eve, and has been mentioned by name in Star Trek Strange New Worlds. There's a deleted section of dialogue from the script in the scene where Kirk, Sulu, Uhura, and McCoy are en route to the Enterprise. Here, in the script, and in fact recorded, but just deleted from the film, was that Sulu was going to get his new command within a month, and it was the USS Excelsior. So, although by name only, the Excelsior was in the Wrath of Khan. We'll come back to that with Search for Spock. Now, Khan himself, we have the returning Khan from Space Seed, Ricardo Montalban. The discussion, it was quite funny because, at the time, this is 1980, well, when they're filming, 1981, it's not like he can just pull up Netflix and watch the episode again, is it? So he had to request tapes be sent to him of this thing he'd filmed 16 years earlier. You know what I mean? Or maybe not exactly 16, but it was not yesterday that he had filmed this thing. And he said his first few takes of the character were much like Mr. Rourke from Fantasy Island, which he was then famous for playing. He did obviously get back to it there, and Khan has gone on to become one of the most iconic Star Trek villains of them all, to the point where you can't bloody name a Star Trek villain without going, but Khan. Khan, the character, has appeared again in Star Trek Into Darkness, again, played now by Benedict Cumberbatch, and as a child in Star Trek Strange New Worlds, in one of the more interesting jiggery-pokeries when it comes to the timeline. One person who does not return for this film is Madeleine Roux, who played Marla McGivers in Space Seed. Now, they fell madly in love at the end of the episode, and away she went with Khan. They got married and, ostensibly to live happily ever after. Well, sadly, that didn't happen. Madeleine Roux was battling MS at this point in her life and was unable to play Marla McGivers if indeed they had tried to get her to return. So they address that in the film by saying that at this point, Marla McGivers, although not named, it's Marla, has died because of the Ceti eels, which is a particularly gruesome way to go. That nebula has appeared how many times in Star Trek at this point? The Reliant and the Miranda classes, well sure, they're still in service right through to the late 24th century. Between them and the Excelsior class, they're like the workhorses of Starfleet. There's a whole story about how the Reliant was originally shown with the nacelles above, but then they flipped it so it would look quite different from the Enterprise. And I think, having seen where they ended, I think they made the right choice. The Kobayashi Maru gets mentioned every other Tuesday now in Star Trek. The one big difference about this Project Genesis is that it doesn't come with a paywall. Prefix codes never get mentioned again, and probably for the best. That whole scene of the mind meld with Remember put in, that was basically there so that Leonard Nimoy would have the option of returning. And, as the next film ended up being called The Search for Spock, I think it worked. It also introduces, although not by name at this point, it introduces the Katra that will become so important in The Search for Spock and beyond. I mean, that in Enterprise you had Surak's Katra as well. There's entire play on this scene of Spock saving the ship in the Lower Decks episode I Excretus, with Rutherford effectively playing the role of Spock. Anyway, it doesn't go very well, and we see the Constitution class explode. It makes me sad. Did you really think I wasn't going to talk about the uniforms? Up for the Monster Maroons. Are you kidding me? Are you absolutely kidding me? Listen, I'm not a hater of the motion picture uniforms, but I'm so glad they changed them up for this one. It suits the more militaristic although they are not military, it does suit the more militaristic tone of this film. The Monster Maroons are, in my opinion, they are the greatest of all of the Star Trek uniforms. Do you hear that, Katie? I think they're gorgeous, I think they're beautiful, and with, the away jacket as well, it was a heck of a visual change. Okay, you had those kind of beige and white and blues of the motion picture, but you also had the gold, the blue, and the red of the original series. Now, while we did have the suggestion with the undershirts, these were different. Now, I'd say they were melting in them because they were wool. They're also really hard to replicate, as any other cosplayer will know. They are absolutely flipping stunning. Leonard Nimoy is the first actor other than the captain to say the Space, the Final Frontier pledge that happens in this film. Now, of course, as the next generation would come, we would have, Patrick Stewart would go on and say it, and so on. Obviously, Anson Mount says it now as well. But this was the first time. James Horner's score, well, he would return himself, of course, for the search for Spock, but his own score would get evoked as time goes on. You can hear a lot of references to it, particularly in Lower Decks as well. The film was released in 1982, which people know is one of the big years for sci-fi. But a special whopper shout just to Nicholas Meyer. Of course, it's not just an up, though of course it's an up. It's the fact that he directed this film so well, he co-wrote The Voyage Home, and then came back to direct The Undiscovered Country. Now, there is still talk of a podcast series, effectively a radio drama, of Star Trek Ceti Alpha and the story with Khan, and I don't have any update for you at this point in time, but the official word is that yes, Nicholas Meyer will be back to Star Trek, and soon, so fingers crossed. Thank you so much for joining us, folks. This has been a lot of fun. I love The Wrath of Khan, don't we all? Maybe some people don't, that's absolutely fair. But I hope you'll join me for the search for Spock next. Until I see you again, please make sure that you live long and prosper. Make sure that you're looking after yourselves, looking after your friends and family. Like, share, subscribe, follow us on the socials at TrekCulture. I'm Sean Ferrick, and I'll talk to you very soon. Thanks very much.